Ladies and gentlemen, it's often said that we are our own worst critics, but have you ever considered that sometimes we are our own bitterest enemies? Imagine the countless battles we wage not with the outside world, but deep within ourselves. There's something uniquely human about this internal struggle, something that ties back to our fears, insecurities, doubts, and the narratives we weave about who we are. In life, we frequently look outward for the source of our troubles. We identify competitors, external forces, and circumstances beyond our control. Yet more often than we like to admit, it is ourselves who stand in the way of our own progress. It's a difficult truth to accept, but once we confront it, we open up the possibility for tremendous personal growth. There's no villain more intimately acquainted with our weaknesses than ourselves. No one knows better where our insecurities lie, where our self-doubt festers, or where our willpower falters. And because we possess this deep understanding, we also have the power to limit ourselves in ways that no external enemy could. This form of self-sabotage is subtle yet insidious, a creeping force that can manifest in all areas of life. We may not recognize it as self-sabotage at first. It might simply feel like anxiety, procrastination, or fear of failure. But peel back the layers and you'll often find that the real antagonist is the person staring back at you in the mirror. Consider the ways we do this, consciously or unconsciously. For some, it's a fear of success. This sounds paradoxical, but it's all too common. The prospect of success brings with it higher expectations, responsibilities, and visibility. Many of us find comfort in mediocrity and remaining unnoticed because to rise means to risk failure. So we convince ourselves that we're not ready, that we're not capable, or that the time isn't right. These are the stories we tell ourselves to justify inaction. We become prisoners of our own making, locked in by the narratives we create. Then there's perfectionism. At first glance, striving for perfection might seem like a virtue. But in reality, it's often a mask for deeper insecurities. The perfectionist is someone who sets impossibly high standards, not because they genuinely believe they can meet them, but because it gives them a reason to avoid trying at all. If the goal is perfection, then failure is inevitable. And so the perfectionist is never really compelled to act. This is self-sabotage in its most elegant form, dressed up as a noble pursuit of excellence, but ultimately serving as a barrier to progress. The perfectionist's worst enemy isn't the external world, it's the internal fear of imperfection. Procrastination is another manifestation of being our own bitter enemy. We often delay what we know we should do, not because we lack time or resources, but because of the fear of failure or the overwhelming nature of the task. The mind in these moments becomes a battlefield. On one side is the rational voice that tells us to take action, and on the other is the voice of resistance that convinces us to wait just a little longer, to start tomorrow, to put it off for another day. In succumbing to procrastination, we deny ourselves the opportunity to make meaningful progress, to move forward, and to overcome obstacles. The cruel irony of procrastination is that it often leads to more stress, more pressure, and ultimately more self-inflicted wounds. Another way we become our own enemies is through negative self-talk. We may not even realize it, but the conversations we have with ourselves shape our reality. How often do we tell ourselves we're not good enough? That we don't deserve success, happiness, or fulfillment? This kind of internal dialogue is corrosive. It undermines our confidence and reinforces limiting beliefs that prevent us from reaching our potential. Negative self-talk becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we tell ourselves we can't, the more we begin to believe it, and the more we act in ways that confirm that belief. This inner dialogue is, in many cases, the greatest enemy we'll ever face, Doc. But why do we do this? Why do we stand in our own way when we have the capacity for greatness? Part of the answer lies in fear. Fear is a primal emotion, one that has evolved over millennia to protect us from danger. But in the modern world, fear often manifests in ways that are no longer protective but restrictive. We fear failure, we fear rejection, we fear the unknown. And so we construct elaborate defense mechanisms to shield ourselves from these perceived threats. We convince ourselves that playing small is safer, that staying in our comfort zones is the best way to avoid pain. But in doing so, we also avoid growth, opportunity, and the fulfillment of our potential. Another part of the answer lies in the stories we inherit and the ones we tell ourselves. From a young age, we are shaped by our environment, by our families, our schools, our societies. We internalize certain beliefs about who we are and what we're capable of. Some of these beliefs serve us well, but others become chains that bind us. For example, if we grow up hearing that we're not smart enough, or that success is reserved for other people, we start to adopt these beliefs as truths. They become part of our identity and we carry them with us into adulthood. Even when the evidence around us suggests otherwise, we cling to these limiting narratives because they're familiar and because changing them would require confronting uncomfortable truths. However, the most dangerous thing about being your own bitter enemy is that it's a battle fought in silence. When you're at war with yourself, there are no external markers to signal that something is wrong. There's no visible enemy to confront, no obvious obstacles to overcome. The battlefield is internal, and the wounds are often invisible to the outside world. This makes the struggle all the more insidious, because it's easy to hide, easy to ignore, and easy to deny. We can go through life projecting an image of success, confidence, and competence, all while secretly undermining ourselves at every turn. So, how do we break free from this cycle? How do we stop being our own worst enemies and start becoming our greatest allies? The first step is awareness. We must learn to recognize the patterns of self-sabotage when they arise. This requires a level of introspection that many of us are uncomfortable with. It requires us to take an honest look at our thoughts, behaviors, and beliefs, and to ask ourselves whether they're serving us or hindering us. This kind of self-awareness is not easy to cultivate, but it's essential if we want to break free from the chains of self-doubt and self-sabotage. Once we've cultivated awareness, the next step is to challenge the narratives we've created about ourselves. This means questioning the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of. Are these stories rooted in truth? Or are they simply remnants of past experiences, fears, or insecurities? By challenging these narratives, we begin to rewrite them. We replace limiting beliefs with empowering ones, and we start to see ourselves not as victims of circumstance, but as active participants in our own lives. Another key to overcoming self-sabotage is to embrace imperfection. One of the reasons we become our own worst enemies is because we're afraid of making mistakes, of failing, of being less than perfect. But the truth is, imperfection is part of the human experience. We will make mistakes. We will fail. But these experiences are not signs of weakness or incompetence. They're opportunities for growth. When we learn to embrace imperfection, we free ourselves from the paralyzing fear of failure. We allow ourselves to take risks, to step outside our comfort zones, and to pursue our goals with courage and determination. In addition to embracing imperfection, we must also learn to practice self-compassion. Too often, we are harsh and critical of ourselves in ways we would never be toward others. We hold ourselves to unrealistic standards and then berate ourselves when we inevitably fall short. But this kind of self-criticism only deepens the cycle of self-sabotage. Instead, we need to cultivate a sense of kindness and understanding toward ourselves. When we make a mistake, we should acknowledge it, learn from it, and then move on. There is no need for self-flagellation or excessive guilt. Self-compassion is not about letting ourselves off the hook, but about treating ourselves with the same care and respect that we would offer to a friend. Breaking free from the cycle of self-sabotage also requires action. It's not enough to simply change our thoughts, we must also change our behaviors. This means setting goals, taking risks, and moving forward even when we feel uncertain or afraid. It means pushing through the resistance that tells us to wait, to procrastinate, or to give up. Action is the antidote to self-doubt, because every step we take, no matter how small, builds momentum and confidence. When we take action, we prove to ourselves that we are capable, that we are strong, and that we can overcome our inner obstacles. We must surround ourselves with positive influences. The people we spend time with have a profound impact on our mindset and our behaviors. If we surround ourselves with individuals who are negative, critical, or unsupportive, it will be much harder to break free from self-sabotage. But if we surround ourselves with people who are positive, encouraging, and supportive, I want to briefly talk about something that affects many of us: self-sabotage and negative self-talk. These are the inner voices and actions that hold us back from reaching our full potential. Self-sabotage happens when we actively or unconsciously hinder our own progress. It's the procrastination before an important task, the fear that makes us turn down opportunities, or the habits that keep us stuck in a cycle of underachievement. The root of this behavior is often fear of failure, fear of success, or fear of change. The heart of self-sabotage is negative self-talk, that inner critic constantly telling us that we're not good enough, smart enough, or deserving of success. This internal dialogue shapes our beliefs and actions, leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy where we limit ourselves based on unfounded fears and insecurities. So how do we break this cycle? It begins with self-awareness. We need to recognize when we are sabotaging ourselves and challenge the negative thoughts that fuel this behavior. Instead of accepting the inner critic's harsh judgments, we must practice self-compassion and remind ourselves that failure is part of growth, not the end of the road. Lastly, surround yourself with supportive people and set realistic, achievable goals. Small victories lead to big successes. Let's remember, we can be our own worst enemy, but we also have the power to be our greatest ally. It starts with changing how we talk to ourselves. Thank you.